We're now going to combine the ideas of trees with the ideas of probability. So let's suppose an experiment consists of flipping an unfair coin twice and recording the results. And the coin is unfair, and we're going to assume that the probability of flipping a heads is 0.2, which means the probability of flipping a tails is 0.8. Let's determine all of the outcomes and their probabilities. Alright, so let's start by drawing a tree. So if we flip a coin once, we could get a heads or we could get a tails. And then we flip a coin again. So off of the heads, we could get the second one could be a heads or a tails. And if the first one's a tails, the second one could also be a heads or a tails. Okay, so we've seen something like this before. But now let's put probabilities into the mix. So we know that when we flip the coin, the probability of getting a heads is 0.2. So we're going to put the probability right on the edge that connects the beginning vertex and H. We're also going to put a 0.2 every other time that we flip a heads as well. So here we get a 0.2, and we also get a 0.2 right there. Now, because the probability of flipping a heads is 0.2, we said that the probability of flipping a tails is 0.8, and therefore we can put that number on all of the branches that lead to tails. Alright, so now we've filled up our tree with all of the probabilities because all of the edges have probabilities on them. Now we can make a couple more columns, one that gives us each outcome and another that gives us the probabilities. So here let's make a column for the outcomes. And we've seen something like this before, right? So if we flip a heads and then a heads, the outcomes is H, H. If we flip a heads and then a tails, we have an HT. Similarly, TH. And finally, TT. So if we wrote this in proper notation, I mean, these are the elements of our sample space. And now let's figure out their probabilities. So the way we can figure out the probabilities is just by multiplying all of the probabilities on a particular branch. So for example, the probability that we get a heads and then another heads is 0.2 times 0.2. Similarly, the probability that we get a heads and then a tails is 0.2 times 0.8. Likewise, 0.8 times 0.2. And finally, 0.8 times 0.8. And so we've listed out all of the outcomes, of which there are 4, and all of their probabilities.